I'm Steve Wiggins, I'm an agricultural economist and I'm a research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute in London. The key challenges for African agriculture obviously are to accelerate the growth rate and improve the productivity of African agriculture. The main thing I was talking about this morning were the fundamental conditions for agricultural growth, which are no secrets. They are an enabling rural investment climate and they are spending on rural public goods. But just to expand that a little, rural investment climate does not have to be perfect. You don't have to have perfect governance, perfect macroeconomics, only to take out the worst failings. And China is our best example of that with its reforms in the late 1970s. They weren't perfect reforms, but they they set the scene for a remarkable expansion of Chinese agriculture. And on the rural public goods, it's really spending on three areas: physical infrastructure, roads, and so on, spending on people, education, health, clean water, and spending on agricultural knowledge goods, that's agricultural research and extension. The main drivers of food prices in Africa: in much of Africa, it is domestic harvests and regional production which drives prices, not world prices. Okay, that's going to be different for the cities, the coastal cities of West Africa. But for much of inland Africa, the transport costs are so high, the dominant factor is domestic production and the ability to move grains between close neighboring countries in regional agreements. So the two things we need to do to keep prices down in Africa, to make food accessible to vulnerable consumers, is to boost domestic production and to encourage regional trade between closely neighboring countries, particularly those where you have close neighbors but who have uncorrelated weather systems, so that if one country's harvest fails because the rains were poor, they can access food from a neighboring country which hasn't suffered bad rains. And there's a lot of scope for that regional trade. Big efforts are being made to improve regional trade, but it's possible to boost it by far more than the levels that we have at the moment. Yes, some people wonder whether we shouldn't have larger scale farms in Africa, but most of our evidence to date shows that on-farm production by smallholders is as efficient as production in larger scale units. Our big challenge with smallholders is to overcome their disadvantages of being small in access to markets, access to finance, access to inputs. But the actual production on farm, that can be done on a small scale. And small scale production tends to be labor intensive. It tends to work with the grain of the capacities of relatively poor people. So smallholder agriculture can be broad-based development that raises the incomes of people who are either poor or below the average income in the country.